A millionaire has an accident and falls into a deep coma. A doctor sings to him every day without knowing who he is. Even unconscious, he falls in love with her voice. When he wakes up, he decides to find the owner of that voice. The music echoed through the ballroom as Lucas Martin observed his reflection in the champagne glass. The golden liquid danced gently, creating small ripples that distorted his own image. At 35, he was considered one of the youngest and most successful entrepreneurs in the technology sector in America. His angular face and always controlled expression had become his trademark on the covers of business magazines. The opening party for Martin Tech's new business complex was taking place on the top floor of the tallest building in Chicago. The Io night sky, dotted with city lights, served as a backdrop for yet another empty celebration. Lucas adjusted his Italian silk tie, a gift from his adoptive mother, Diana Martin, who at that moment was animatedly conversing with a group of investors on the other side of the room. "Cousin, you really know how to impress," Richard's voice cut through his thoughts like a razor. His cousin, the company's financial director, approached with his typical calculated smile. "But I must admit I expected something more innovative. Are you losing your touch?" Lucas maintained a neutral expression, years of training in masking, emotions automatically kicking in. Innovation doesn't always mean spectacle, Richard. Sometimes it's about subtlety and strategy. "Ah yes, your famous strategy," Richard laughed, taking a sip of his drink. "Like that time you decided to donate millions to that nameless NGO. Money wasted, if you want my opinion." The comment hit Lucas harder than he would like to admit. The anonymous donations were one of the few things that still gave meaning to his existence. It was his way of trying to fill a void that grew each day, even if no one knew about it. Diana approached, her presence as elegant as always. "Lucas, darling, the Japanese investors are eager to discuss the new platform. Could you—" "Of course, Mother," he responded automatically, internally grateful for the interruption. But Richard wasn't finished. "You know what your problem is, cousin," Richard whispered, holding his arm. "You never learned to be a true Martin. All. That barely disguised sentimentality. You think we don't notice how you hide behind those numbers and spreadsheets?" Lucas felt something break inside him. Years of repressed frustration and loneliness threatened to overflow. "And you, Richard? What do you know about being genuine, about having a soul?" "Soul?" Richard laughed with disdain. "We're talking about business, not poetry. You're weak, Lucas. You always have been. An orphan desperately trying to prove his worth." The words hit like stab wounds. Lucas turned abruptly, leaving the hall without saying goodbye to anyone. The Chicago night air struck his face when he went out to the garage. His hands trembled as he took the car keys. The city lights passed like blurs as he accelerated down the highway. His mind was in turmoil, filled with voices that had pursued him since childhood. The adopted boy who needed to be perfect, the executive who couldn't show weakness, the man who had forgotten how to feel. A sharp curve approached quickly. Lucas tried to reduce his speed, but it was too late. The last thought he had before everything went dark was how ironic it was that, even surrounded by hundreds of people at that party, no one really knew him. The constant beeping of the machines was the only thing Lucas could perceive. His body was motionless, trapped in a deep darkness, but his mind remained painfully alert. He could hear the steps of the medical staff, whispered conversations, the drawing of curtains. It was a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken. "Doctor." Helen Sullivan adjusted the cardiac monitor, her tired eyes scanning the numbers flashing on the screen. At 32, she already carried on her face the marks of endless shifts and difficult decisions. Her delicate hands checked the patient's vital signs with a gentleness that contrasted with the coldness of the hospital environment. "Dr. Mitchell, the neurological tests show no change," she informed the doctor in charge. "But there's something different about this case." The older doctor raised an eyebrow. "Different how, Dr. Sullivan?" "It's as if he's present. I can't explain it scientifically, but I feel like he can hear us." And Lucas could. Every word, every sigh, every moment of silence, especially when her voice, soft and comforting, penetrated the darkness that enveloped him. On the first night she was alone on duty, Helen sat beside his bed. She was exhausted after a particularly difficult day. "You know," she began as if talking to a friend, "sometimes I wonder if I chose the right path." Lucas, in his world of shadows, absorbed every word. It was the first time someone spoke to him as a person, not as a medical case. "When I was a child, I dreamed of being a singer," she continued, absently adjusting the sheet. "My mother loved hearing me sing, but after she was gone, from a medical error, well, I decided I needed to do something to prevent other families from going through the same thing." The late hours passed slowly in the hospital. Helen developed the habit of talking to Lucas during her shifts. She told him about her day, her worries, her hidden dreams. And on the quietest nights, when the weight of loneliness became unbearable, she sang. "This was my mother's favorite song," she whispered one night, before starting to softly sing an old melody. Her voice, laden with contained emotion, filled the room with an unexpected intimacy. Lucas, in his state of imprisoned consciousness, felt each note pierce the darkness that enveloped him. It was as if her voice built a bridge between his world of silence and the external reality. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel completely lost. What Helen didn't know, as she shared her most vulnerable moments with that seemingly unconscious patient, was that her words were having a much greater impact than she could imagine. Each story, each song, each moment of honesty was helping to rebuild something Lucas had lost long before the accident: his humanity. But not all moments were peaceful. Lucas also heard the discussions, especially when Richard and his uncle Frank visited. Their voices were cutting, their words chosen to hurt. "We can't keep this going indefinitely," Richard argued one particularly tense afternoon. "The company needs decisions, and he's here, occupying a premium bed like an expired asset." "Calm down, Richard," Frank responded, his voice calculatedly neutral. "We need to be strategic about this. One wrong move, and the press will be all over us like vultures." Helen, passing through the corridor at that moment, felt her stomach turn at the coldness of the conversation. She waited for them to leave before entering the room, her eyes welling with contained anger. Helen kept a secret that she herself didn't fully understand. In her long nighttime conversations with Lucas, something began to awaken in her memory. Fragments of a past that seemed too distant to be real. While organizing files in her small office at the hospital, her hands found an old news article about the NGO that had helped her as a child. "You won't believe what I found today," she spoke to Lucas that night, sitting in the armchair next to his bed. "You know that fire I told you about? When I lost almost everything at 12? I just discovered more about the organization that helped me back then." Her fingers gently traced the yellowed paper. "The New Horizons Foundation. They appeared like angels when I needed them most. They paid for treatment, ensured a place to live, even school supplies." Her voice faltered slightly. "The most amazing thing is that I never knew who was behind the donations. It was all anonymous." Lucas, in his forced silence, felt his heart racing. He remembered that foundation perfectly. It was one of his first secret projects initiated as soon as he took control of part of the family business. The idea emerged after finding old documents about his own adoption, which made him wonder how many other children needed a second chance. "Sometimes," Helen continued, "I think about how life takes interesting turns. That frightened girl who lost everything became a doctor, and now I'm here trying to give back in some way." The shift followed its normal routine when Mrs. Celeste, an elderly lady who worked in hospital cleaning, entered the room. Known for her spiritual sensitivity, she always said she could feel special energies in certain patients. Seeing Helen, she smiled enigmatically. "Doctor, have you noticed how he responds when you sing?" Mrs. Celeste asked, while carefully wiping the furniture. Helen frowned. "What do you mean, Mrs. Celeste?" "The machines, my dear, they change rhythm. It's as if his soul dances with your voice." The doctor tried to hide her interest, but spent the rest of the shift observing the monitors more carefully. To her surprise, there were indeed small alterations in the patterns when she spoke or sang near Lucas. During the night, Helen received a call that disturbed her. It was from the hospital director, informing her about an urgent meeting with representatives of the Martin family. "We need to discuss alternatives," he said, carefully choosing his words. After hanging up the phone, she returned to Lucas's room. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked the equipment. "I won't let them hurt you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "There's something special happening here. I can feel it." That night, contradicting all her medical training and rationality, Helen did something different. She took her old songbook, the one that kept the songs her mother loved so much, and began to softly sing a melody in Spanish. "Gracias a la vida, que me ha dado tanto." Her voice filled the room with deep emotion. The tears she had been holding back for so long finally found freedom to fall. What Helen didn't notice, focused on her music, was the small alteration on the cardiac monitor. For a brief moment, the pattern changed significantly, as if Lucas's heart were trying to follow the rhythm of the song. Mrs. Celeste, passing through the corridor, stopped silently at the door. Her mysterious smile grew as she observed the scene. She could see what others couldn't, an invisible connection strengthening, a bond that transcended the barrier between consciousness and unconsciousness. "This is how souls recognize each other," she murmured to herself, discreetly moving away. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." The hospital meeting room was filled with a palpable tension. Richard Martin, impeccable, in his Italian suit, presented a series of documents to the board members. His voice flowed with the smoothness of an experienced salesman, but his eyes revealed a calculating coldness. "As you can see," he gestured to the graphs projected on the screen, "keeping a patient in a vegetative state for so long represents a significant cost for the hospital. Our company is willing to offer a more suitable solution." Helen, seated in the corner of the room, felt her stomach turn. The solution proposed by Richard involved transferring Lucas to a facility with less structure, where costs would be reduced and consequently the quality of treatment as well. "But his vital signs are stable," she argued, her voice trembling slightly with indignation, "and there are indications of responsive brain activity." Dr. Sullivan, the hospital director, interrupted her softly. "We appreciate your dedication, but we need to be practical." Richard gave Helen a condescending look. "Perhaps the doctor is too emotionally involved with this particular case. It happens with young professionals." After the meeting, Helen was walking through the hospital corridors when she noticed strange activity near Lucas's room. Her tall man with a serious appearance was observing the door with interest. When he noticed her approach, he quickly moved away. "Who was that?" she asked one of the nurses. "Michael Santos," replied the nurse, "former head of security at Martin Tech. He was fired a few years ago, they say, by direct order from Mr. Lucas." Helen frowned, intrigued. Why would a former employee be lurking around the room? Her intuition told her there was more to this story. During her night shift, she decided to investigate more about Martin Tech. Using the computer at the nursing station, she discovered a series of old reports. One in particular caught her attention. The news about a large anonymous donation to various charitable institutions, including the New Horizons Foundation. "This can't be coincidence," she murmured to herself, mentally connecting the dots. The dates of the donations coincided with the time when Lucas assumed greater control in the company. When she returned to the room, she found Mrs. Celeste organizing some of Lucas's belongings. The lady smiled mysteriously, as if guarding a precious secret. "You know, Doctor," she began, adjusting a photo frame on the bedside table, "sometimes the angels who save us come back to be saved by us." Helen looked at the photo in the frame. It showed Lucas at a charity event, handing a check to a charitable institution. His smile in the photo was different from the cold expressions she saw in business magazines. There was something genuine there, something that touched her heart in an inexplicable way. "Mrs. Celeste," Helen hesitated, "do you believe people can connect even when one of them is absent?" The lady took her hands with affection. "My child, absence is only for the eyes. The heart knows how to recognize souls that have met before." That night, Helen decided to do something different. She brought her old guitar, the one she hadn't played since college days. She sat next to the bed and began to strum softly on the strings. "This song," she spoke quietly, "was my mother's favorite. She said some melodies have the power to heal the soul." As she sang, she didn't notice Michael Santos discreetly observing through the window of the room, his face marked by an expression of deep contemplation. In his hands, he held a yellowed envelope with documents that could change everything, papers that revealed the true story behind Lucas Martin's anonymous donations. Dawn was breaking through the hospital windows when something extraordinary happened. During another routine check, Helen noticed a subtle change in Lucas's brain patterns. Her heart raced while she studied the graphs with redoubled attention. "Dr. Mitchell," she called, her voice trembling with expectation. "I need you to come. See this immediately." The next minutes were filled with intense activity. A medical team gathered around the bed, conducting a series of tests and evaluations. Helen remained at Lucas's side, her hands instinctively holding his. "Squeeze my hand if you can hear me," she whispered, close to his ear. Time seemed to freeze when, very slightly, she felt pressure on her fingers. News of Lucas Martin's awakening spread quickly through the hospital. Richard was the first family member to arrive, his face a mask of concern that barely disguised his anxiety. "We need to transfer him immediately to a private clinic," he insisted, nervously gesturing with his documents. "I have everything prepared." "That won't be possible at the moment," Dr. Mitchell intervened firmly. "The patient needs constant monitoring during this critical phase." Helen observed the scene with growing apprehension. Something in Richard's behavior deeply disturbed her. It was as if he feared Lucas would completely regain consciousness. During the afternoon, Michael Santos returned to the hospital. This time, he didn't hide. He approached Helen directly when she left for her break. "Dr. Sullivan," his voice was low and urgent, "we need to talk. It's about Lucas Martin and about you." They met in the hospital cafeteria. Michael took a series of old documents from his briefcase. 15 years ago, I was unjustly fired from Martin Tech," he began, his eyes fixed on the papers. "Or at least, I thought it was unjust at the time. Lucas accused me of negligence with confidential, tighter security, but now I know he was protecting me." Helen frowned, confused. "Protecting you from what?" "From the files I had accidentally discovered. Documents about secret donations, bank transfers to charitable institutions, including a significant one to the New Horizons Foundation after a specific fire." Helen's heart stopped for a moment. "The fire at my house?" Michael nodded gravely. "Lucas found out about the accident. He personally ensured you received all necessary support, but kept everything anonymous. When he realized I had found the records, he removed me from the company with a generous severance package to prevent Richard from finding out." But why couldn't Richard know? Because he was always against any philanthropic initiative of the company. For him, charity is a waste of resources, and he had enough influence on the board to block all of Lucas's attempts to use company money to help people. Helen felt the world spin. All the pieces were starting to fit together. The mysterious donations, Richard's hostility, the changes in vital signs when she sang. "There's one more thing," Michael continued, hesitant. "I found records about Lucas's biological mother. She's still alive, living on the streets of Chicago. She was forced to give him up for adoption when she was very young." At that moment, a nurse burst into the cafeteria. "Dr. Sullivan, come quickly, the patient, he's trying to speak." Helen ran back to the room, her heart beating wildly. Upon entering, she found Lucas with his eyes half open, struggling to form words. She approached, holding his hand as she had done so many times during the past months. "I'm here," she whispered. "So you're safe." Lucas's lips moved slightly, and an almost inaudible word escaped. "Gracias." The days following Lucas's awakening were intense. His recovery progressed slowly, but Helen noticed something different in his gaze, a depth that didn't appear in the old photos from business magazines. It was as if the coma experience had transformed something fundamental in his essence. During physical therapy sessions, Lucas demonstrated a silent determination. His eyes followed Helen whenever she was in the room, but he still couldn't speak much. The few words he pronounced were whispered, as if he were keeping a secret. Richard intensified his visits, always accompanied by lawyers and consultants. One particularly tense afternoon, Helen found him arguing with Frank in the corridor. "He's in no condition to make business decisions," Richard argued, gesturing emphatically. "We need to activate the temporary succession protocol we prepared." "And, coincidentally, you would be the successor," Frank replied, his tone ironic. "Very convenient, isn't it?" Helen passed by them, pretending not to hear, but her heart was heavy. That night, during her shift, she found Mrs. Celeste lighting a candle at the small altar she maintained in the staff room. "What do you think will happen?" Helen asked, sitting beside the older woman. "Oh, my child," Mrs. Celeste smiled her enigmatic smile. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what we really have. That young man, he's different. The darkness taught him the value of light." The next day, during the physical therapy session, something unexpected happened. While Helen was helping Lucas with the exercises, he held her hand with more strength than usual. "I heard everything," he managed to say, his voice still weak. "Every word, every song." Helen froze, her heart beating erratically. "Lucas, you don't need." "Tertius, yes I do," he insisted, making a visible effort to speak. "You brought me back, not just from the coma, but from years of loneliness." Silent tears began to run down Helen's face. All the nights of confessions, all the songs sung in the dark, all the moments of shared vulnerability. He had heard everything. At that moment, Michael entered the room, carrying a folder. Seeing Lucas awake and talking, a sincere smile illuminated his face. "Mr. Martin," he began, but Lucas interrupted him with a gesture. "Michael." "I'm sorry," Lucas spoke, his voice gaining strength. "I should have explained, should have trusted." "There's nothing to apologize for," Michael replied, approaching the bed. "I understand now, and I've brought something you need to see." Sue opened the folder, revealing old documents and photographs. Among them, a faded image showed a young woman holding a baby. "Your biological mother," Michael explained softly. "She never stopped thinking about you. After she was forced to give you up, she lost her way, but she's still alive, living on the streets of Chicago." Lucas closed his eyes, absorbing the information. When he reopened them, there was a new determination in his gaze. "Helen," he called, his voice firmer, "I need your help. I can't let Richard take over the company or continue sabotaging the social projects. But first, I need to find my mother." Helen looked at the man she had first known through silence, then through music, and was now getting to know through his words and actions. An idea began to form in her mind. "What if," she began, hesitant, "what if you disappeared for a while? Let Richard think he's won while we get organized." Michael nodded slowly, understanding the plan. "I can help with that. I have contacts, safe places." "But first," Lucas interrupted, his voice laden with emotion, "I want to hear you. Sing one more time, now that I can open my eyes to see." The plan was put into action on a moonless night. Michael had meticulously prepared everything. Fake documents, a discreet apartment on the outskirts of the city, and a new identity for Lucas. Helen, for her part, ensured that his transfer to a rehabilitation clinic was scheduled for that specific night. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Helen asked, helping Lucas dress in ordinary clothes, very different from the expensive suits he used to wear. His hair had been cut differently, and a stubble was beginning to modify his characteristic features. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," he replied, his voice stronger after weeks of speech therapy. "It's the only way to protect everything I've built and discover who I really am." Mrs. Celeste entered the room carrying an amulet. "For protection," she said, placing it around Lucas's neck. "And so you don't forget who you are, even when you're pretending to be someone else." The moment of transfer arrived. An ambulance waited in the parking lot, but Lucas would never reach it. Midway through, during a planned exchange of stretchers, he and Michael disappeared through a rarely used service door. "We'll meet at the address we agreed on," Michael whispered to Helen before leaving with Lucas. When Richard arrived at the ER hospital the next morning, he found only an empty room and a confused medical team. His fury was explosive. "What do you mean he's gone?" he shouted at the hospital director. "You had a patient in recovery and you lost him?" Helen observed the scene from a distance, maintaining a worried expression that masked her involvement in the plan. Meanwhile, in a simple apartment in the Bridgeport neighborhood, Lucas was beginning his temporary new life as Daniel Sanders, a math teacher recovering from an accident. "First phase completed," Michael commented, helping Lucas get settled. "Now we need to find your mother before Richard realizes what's happening." Lucas spent his first days adapting to his new reality. The apartment was small but comfortable, very different from the luxurious penthouse where he lived. On the wall, a map of Chicago was marked with possible locations where his biological mother might be found. Helen visited whenever possible, taking care not to raise suspicions. During one such visit, she brought her guitar. "I thought we could have some lessons," she suggested, smiling, "since you spent so much time listening to me sing." The intimacy between them grew naturally, built on a foundation of trust and mutual understanding. Lucas discovered that he loved hearing Helen talk about her patients, about her dreams of improving the healthcare system, about the small daily victories she celebrated. "You know what's funny?" he commented one night while trying to learn some basic chords. "I spent years building an image of success, but I never felt as fulfilled as I do now, simply being myself." One day, during one of his searches, Michael brought important news. "I found someone." "Who knows your mother?" he said, showing a photo on his phone. "She frequents a shelter in Pilsen. Her name is Mary Grace." Lucas felt his heart tighten upon seeing the image of the woman with graying hair, a face marked by time, and eyes that carried a deep sadness. Even so, there was something familiar in her smile, the same smile he saw in old photos of himself. "I need to see her," he decided, but not as Lucas Martin, the businessman. "I need to meet her as Daniel Sanders, the teacher. I need her to see me as a person, not as a possibility for financial rescue." Helen squeezed his hand in support. "I'll go with you," she said simply. Meanwhile, in the Martin Tech office, Richard was conducting a tense meeting with the administrative board. On the screen behind him, graphs showed a drop in company shares after Lucas's disappearance. "It's evident we need new leadership," he argued, his honeyed voice hiding his true intentions. "Someone who can bring stability amid this crisis." What Richard didn't know was that Michael had installed a small recording device in the meeting room. Each word of his was being recorded, each plan documented. It was only a matter of time until his true nature was exposed. The St. Clair shelter was a simple building in the heart of Pilsen. Helen and Lucas, now completely transformed into his role as Daniel Sanders, approached the place on a Thursday morning. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air as homeless people formed an orderly line for breakfast. "She always comes on Thursdays," explained Sister Connie, a short nun with kind eyes who coordinated the shelter. "Mary Grace, such her gentle soul. Even with so little, she always helps others." Lucas felt his heart race when a woman with graying hair entered the dining hall. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her face, though marked by time, maintained a serene dignity. In her hands, she carried a small, worn notebook. "That notebook," Sister Connie commented, "she never separates from it. Says it's poetry she wrote for the son she lost." Helen discreetly squeezed Lucas's hand, feeling his emotion. Following the plan, she approached Mary first. "Good morning," Helen smiled, sitting beside her. "I'm Helen, a new volunteer here. I see you're writing." Mary looked up, a shy smile illuminating her face. "Oh yes, just some silly thoughts. Do you like poetry?" "Actually," Helen replied, "I like music more, but they say poetry and music are sisters, aren't they?" Lucas observed the interaction from a distance, each gesture of his mother being recorded in his memory. The way she slightly tilted her head when smiling, how she held the coffee cup with both hands, small details he would keep forever. In the days that followed, Lucas and Helen regularly visited the shelter. He, as Daniel, offered basic math classes to anyone who wanted to learn. Mary always attended the classes, sitting discreetly at the back of the room. "You have a gift for teaching," she commented one day after a class. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Lucas felt his throat tighten. "Really? Who?" "My son's father," she answered, her eyes lost in memories. "He was a math teacher at the school where I worked as a janitor. It was a forbidden love. My family didn't accept it. When I got pregnant, I was forced to give up the baby." While this delicate reconnection developed, Michael continued his investigation work. The recordings of Richard's meetings revealed an increasingly elaborate plan to take total control of the company. "He's planning an extraordinary assembly," Michael informed during a meeting in his apartment. "He'll use Lucas's prolonged absence as justification for a change in presidency." Helen, who divided her time between the hospital and the shelter, began to notice subtle changes in Lucas. The cold, calculating businessman was giving way to a more sensitive man, more connected with the people around him. One afternoon, after another class at the shelter, Mary asked to show something to Daniel. She opened her worn notebook and began to read a poem. "My son, whom I didn't see grow, I carry your smile within me. In nights of solitude, I imagine what your end would be like. But I know that somewhere, you must be shining." Lucas fought to contain his tears. Helen, noticing his emotion, began to hum softly, transforming Mary's verses into an improvised song. Mary looked at Helen with surprise and gratitude. "How beautiful. I never imagined my words becoming music." "Sometimes," Helen replied, exchanging a significant look with Lucas, "music has the power to reconnect hearts separated by time." The sun of the afternoon came through the windows of St. Clair's shelter when Mary Grace decided to share more of her story with Daniel. Seated on a bench in the small garden, she leafed through her poetry notebook, each yellowed page holding fragments of her life. "Look," she pointed to a specific date. "I wrote this on his birthday. Every year on this day I buy a small cake and sing happy birthday, alone." Lucas felt his heart tighten. It was his birthday, March 15th, the date he always celebrated with the Martin family, without ever knowing that somewhere in the city, his biological mother also celebrated it in silence and solitude. "You never tried to find him?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mary smiled sadly. "In the beginning, yes, but the family who adopted him was very powerful. They made it clear that I should keep my distance. Over time, I lost everything, my job, my home, but I ended up on the streets. What right would I have to appear in his life like this?" Helen, who was observing the scene from a distance, noticed the tension in Lucas's body. She approached naturally, sitting beside them. "You know, Mary," she began softly, "sometimes life surprises us. People can accept us exactly as we are." That moment, Helen's cell phone vibrated. It was an urgent message from Michael. "Richard called an extraordinary assembly for tomorrow. He's going to try to force a vote to assume the presidency." Lucas read the message over Helen's shoulder, his face momentarily hardening. Mary noticed the change in his expression. "Did something happen, Daniel?" He hesitated, looking at this woman who, even after so much suffering, maintained an impressive dignity and kindness. He made a decision. "Mary, I need to tell you a story about a boy who was adopted, grew up in a rich family, but always felt an inexplicable emptiness." As Lucas spoke, Mary's expression gradually changed. Her eyes, first curious, began to show a glimmer of recognition. When he mentioned the date of birth and the name of the hospital, her hands began to tremble. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her eyes fixed on Lucas's face, as if seeing him for the first time. "My Lucas?" "Yes, Mom," he answered, his voice choked. "It's me." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Celeste, who unexpectedly appeared in the garden. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with her always mysterious look, "but there's something you need to see." She extended a newspaper. On the front page, a striking headline, "Martin Tech heir disappears. Cousin calls emergency assembly." "Richard is moving his pieces faster than we expected," Helen commented, concerned. Lucas looked at his mother, who was still watching him with a mixture of shock and infinite love. "Mom, I know it's a lot to process, but I need your help. I need to prevent ill-intentioned people from destroying something I built to help others." Mary dried the tears that ran down her face. "Son, all these years I wrote poetry imagining what you would be like, and now I discover you became exactly the man I dreamed of, someone who cares about others." Mrs. Celeste smiled as if she already knew all this would happen. Sometimes we need to lose our way to find our true direction. Helen picked up her guitar, which she always carried with her during visits to the shelter. "Mary, remember that poem of yours that we turned into music? I think it's time for more people to hear it." Lucas looked questioningly at Helen, who smiled in response. "I have a plan," she said, "and it will involve music, poetry, and a revelation that no one expects." The plan began to take shape in the small living room of Michael's apartment. Helen, Lucas, Mary, and Mrs. Celeste gathered to discuss the details, while the former security chief organized a series of documents on the table. "The assembly will be held in the main auditorium of Martin Tech," Michael explained, showing the building's floor plan. Richard invited the press, clearly planning to turn this into a public spectacle. "He always had a weakness for dramatization," Lucas commented, a slight ironic smile on his lips. "But this time, we'll use that to our advantage." Helen picked up her guitar, strumming softly while explaining her idea. "Martin Tech always held charity events, right? What if we transformed this assembly into something bigger?" Mary, who remained quiet, absorbing everything, opened her poetry notebook. "Son, all these words I wrote, they were my way of keeping you alive in my heart. Perhaps now they can serve a greater purpose." Mrs. Celeste approached Mary, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your words carry years of love and longing. It's time for the world to know this story." During the following hours, Helen and Mary worked together, transforming the poems into a song that told their story, the story of a mother separated from her son, of a love that survived time and circumstances. Lucas observed the two most important women in his life collaborating, feeling an emotion he had never experienced in all his years of business success. "Michael," he called the ex-security guard, "we need one more thing. All the records of the anonymous donations, especially to the New Horizons Foundation." "Already taken care of," Michael replied, showing a folder. "And there's more. I found evidence that Richard had been diverting money from the company's social projects for years, transforming donations into personal investments." Helen stopped playing, a worried expression on her face. "Lucas, are you sure you want to do this? Expose your entire life like this?" He approached her, taking her hands in his. "For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely certain of what I want. I'm no longer that cold executive who lived for numbers. You taught me, during those months in the hospital, that true strength lies in being vulnerable, in allowing yourself to feel." Mary observed the interaction between her son and Helen with teary eyes. "You love her, don't you?" Lucas looked at Helen, a soft smile on his lips. "She brought me back to life. Not just from the coma, but from years of living as a shadow of myself." Mrs. Celeste began to arrange her things, preparing to leave. "Tomorrow will be an important day. I need to prepare some special protections." "Mrs. Celeste," Helen called, "did you know from the beginning?" The lady smiled, her ever-mysterious smile. "My child, there are things the eyes don't see, but the heart recognizes instantly. When I saw you two together for the first time in the hospital, I realized you were souls who already knew each other from other lives." As the night progressed, preparations continued. Michael organized security, ensuring they would have access to the auditorium at the right moment. Helen and Mary rehearsed the song they had created, their voices harmonizing in a way that seemed predestined. Lucas, observing everything, thought about how his life had changed, from the lonely executive to the man who was now surrounded by genuine love, a mother who never stopped loving him, a woman who saved him with her voice and soul, loyal friends who risked everything to help him. Tomorrow, he thought, won't just be about saving the company. It will be about rescuing the humanity that exists in each story, in each gesture of love. The Martin Tech auditorium was packed that morning. Executives in expensive suits, eager journalists and important shareholders, occupied every available seat. Richard, impeccable in his Italian suit, was conducting the assembly with a confident smile. "As you all know," he began, his voice studiously concerned, "my cousin Lucas has been missing for weeks. As family and responsible executives, we cannot allow the company to continue without leadership." Backstage, Helen adjusted the microphone on her simple yet elegant dress. Mary, wearing new clothes chosen especially for the occasion, held her poetry notebook with trembling hands. Michael, discreetly positioned near the main entrance, was making final adjustments to the sound system. "The moment is delicate," Richard continued, gesturing to the graphs projected behind him. "But I have a detailed plan to take Martin Tech to new heights. First, we need to reevaluate some questionable investments." In the front row, Diana Martin, Lucas's adoptive mother, observed everything with a tense expression. Beside her, Frank nervously fidgeted with his tie. "What about the social projects?" a female voice sounded from the back of the auditorium. Everyone turned to see Helen, who was calmly walking toward the stage. Richard frowned. "Excuse me, but this is a private meeting." "Yes, it's private," Helen agreed, climbing onto the stage with her guitar. "But some stories need to be told, no matter how private they are." She began to gently strum the strings of the guitar, filling the auditorium with a soft and melancholic melody. From the other side of the stage, Mary emerged from the shadows, her notebook open in her hands. "This is a love story," Mary began, her voice trembling slightly. "The story of a mother who was forced to abandon her son, but never abandoned her love for him." Richard tried to intervene, but Michael had already taken control of the sound system. On the screen behind them, documents began to appear. Donation, records, financial spreadsheets, evidence of Richard's manipulations. "For years," Helen continued as she played, "this son grew, became a successful man. But something was always missing in his life, until an accident forced him to stop, to listen, to feel." Mary began to sing the verses she had written over the years, her voice gaining strength with each word. Helen accompanied her on the guitar, their voices intertwining in a harmony that made the entire auditorium hold its breath. Diana Martin brought her hands to her face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she recognized the story. Frank looked at Richard with an expression of growing understanding and disgust. "Impossible!" Richard tried to shout, but his voice was drowned out by the music and the murmurs growing in the audience. It was then that a figure emerged from the side entrance of the auditorium. Lucas, still wearing Daniel Sanders's simple clothes but with the bearing and presence that everyone recognized, walked to the center of the stage. "Every word of this song is true," he declared, his voice strong and clear. "Just as the documents you're seeing are true. Martin Tech was never just about profits and numbers. It was about making a difference in people's lives." Diana stood up, her eyes fixed on Mary. Years of family secrets and lies began to crumble, giving way to a truth long hidden. "Mother," Lucas spoke, looking at Diana, "you taught me to be strong, to be a leader. But it was this woman," he pointed to Mary, "who taught me through her words written in solitude the meaning of unconditional love." The music reached its final crescendo, the voices of Helen and Mary echoing through the auditorium, in a melody that spoke of loss, love, and redemption. When the last note dissipated, the silence that followed was deafening. The silence in the auditorium was broken by a spontaneous round of applause. Diana Martin was the first to stand, walking slowly toward the stage, her eyes alternating between Lucas and Mary. "All these years," she murmured, "I kept this secret thinking I was protecting you, Lucas, but now I see I was only perpetuating an injustice." Richard, seeing his plan crumble, tried one last card. "This is a theatrical show. You can't believe this fantastical story." "Fantastical?" Michael interrupted, projecting new documents on the screen. "How do you explain these records, Richard? The diversion of funds from social projects, the offshore accounts, the falsified documents." Frank stood up, his voice trembling with indignation. "So that's why you were always against the company's philanthropic initiatives? Because you were diverting the money?" On stage, Helen put her guitar aside and approached Lucas, intertwining her fingers with his. Mary observed everything with teary eyes, her poetry notebook pressed against her chest. "When I was in a coma," Lucas began, his voice echoing through the auditorium, "I learned something valuable. I learned that true wealth isn't in the numbers of a bank account, but in the connections we make, the lives we touch." Mrs. Celeste, who had arrived discreetly, smiled from the back of the auditorium. Next to her, several familiar faces from St. Clair Shelter observed the scene with emotion. "Martin Tech was always more than a technology company," Lucas continued. "It was a means of doing good, of transforming lives, as it did with a young doctor years ago through the New Horizons Foundation." Helen squeezed his hand, remembering the fire, the support received, how that anonymous help had changed her life. "And now," Lucas turned to the shareholders, "I propose a new direction for our company, one that combines technological innovation with social responsibility, that uses our resources not just to generate profits but to create opportunities." Diana approached Mary, tears flowing freely down her face. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I should have allowed you to be part of his life." Mary smiled gently. "You raised him to be the wonderful man he is today. There's nothing to forgive." Richard, seeing his imminent defeat, tried to leave discreetly but was prevented by security guards that Michael had strategically positioned. "The evidence will be handed over to the proper authorities," Michael announced, "along with records of all the sabotage attempts during the period Lucas was in the hospital." Lucas approached the microphone one last time. "Today is not about revenge or punishment. It's about new beginnings, about recognizing that each person has a story, a song to be sung." Helen picked up her guitar again, starting to play softly. Mary opened her notebook one last time, and together they began to sing again, no longer a song of loss and longing, but a celebration of reunion and hope. The entire auditorium watched in reverent silence as mother and son embraced on stage, decades of separation dissolving in a moment of pure love. Diana joined the embrace, forming an image that no one present would ever forget. Mrs. Celeste, from her place at the back of the auditorium, whispered to herself, "Sometimes the universe needs to break a heart so it can grow large enough to embrace all the love it deserves." The weeks following the assembly were filled with intense changes at Martin Tech. The executive office, once cold and impersonal, gained a new energy. Lucas had transformed one of the meeting rooms into a multi-purpose space where employees could share ideas for social projects. "It's amazing how everything has changed," Helen commented one afternoon, observing a group of developers discussing a new app to connect shelters. "Who would have thought that a technology company could have so much humanity?" Lucas smiled, adjusting his tie in a more relaxed way than he used to wear. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true purpose." Mary had become a constant presence in the company, not as the president's mother, but as the coordinator of the new social assistance program. Her poetry notebook had inspired a project of creative, writing workshops for people in vulnerable situations. "Just look," Mrs. Celeste commented, entering the room with her characteristic manner. "How the universe works in mysterious ways. A poem written in solitude now touches hundreds of hearts." St. Clair Shelter had become the pilot project of a larger initiative. With Martin Tech's support, other shelters began to be revitalized throughout the city. Michael, now the company's director of social responsibility, personally coordinated each new project. "You know what's most impressive?" he commented during a meeting. "The numbers show that the more we invest in social projects, the more the company grows. It's as if the market finally understood that success and social responsibility can go hand in hand." Diana Martin began dividing her time between the administrative board and volunteer work. The coexistence with Mary had transformed the two women into inseparable friends, united by their love for the same son. "I never imagined I could feel so much peace," Diana confided to Helen during coffee. "It's as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my heart." One afternoon, while Lucas was organizing some documents in his office, he found an old photo, himself as a baby, in Diana's arms. Next to it, he placed a new photograph, himself between Diana and Mary, all smiling, during a Sunday lunch. "It's a beautiful family you have," Helen commented, entering the room with her guitar. She had maintained the habit of playing during breaks from her work at the hospital, now as the director of the new music therapy program. "Our family," Lucas gently corrected, pulling her close. "You've been part of it since the first day, when your voice brought me back." On the screen in the room, a presentation showed the new projects under development: an app to connect donors to social causes, a professional training program for homeless people, and a network of cultural centers that combine technology and art. Richard would never understand this, Lucas reflected, observing the projects. He saw only numbers when the true value was in the stories behind them. Helen strummed a few notes on her guitar. "Speaking of stories, your mother finished setting all the poems from her notebook to music. Want to hear the latest one?" As the soft melody filled the room, Lucas closed his eyes, allowing himself to be carried away by the music. Each note seemed to tell a piece of his journey: the lonely executive, the coma patient, the man who rediscovered the meaning of love. "You know what's most incredible?" he asked when the music ended. "Each person we help today has their own story, their own music to be sung." Outside the room, the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. In the reception area of Martin Tech, a new logo had been installed, with a slogan that summarized the company's new philosophy: technology with purpose, innovation with heart. The transformation of Martin Tech echoed far beyond the company's boundaries. On a sunny morning, Lucas contemplated the view from his office while reading the headlines of major business newspapers. Martin Tech revolutionizes corporate management model, technology and social responsibility. The new corporate paradigm. "You've created a movement," Helen commented, entering the room with a folder of reports. "Other companies are starting to follow our example." The project Lucas was most proud of was the Grace to Life Cultural Center, a space that combined technology, art, and social assistance. The venue, installed in a renovated old warehouse, had become a meeting point for people of all social classes. Mary coordinated the creative writing workshops, her classes always full of people eager to learn how to transform their stories into poetry. Diana, in turn, had discovered a talent for vocational guidance, helping underprivileged youth find their professional paths. "Look who's here," Mrs. Celeste announced, entering the room with a special group of visitors. It was a class of children from the social project, all equipped with tablets donated by the company. "Uncle Lucas," they shouted in chorus, running to hug him. Lucas had made a point of maintaining personal contact with the beneficiaries of the projects, never forgetting that each number on a spreadsheet represented a real life. Helen picked up her guitar, a constant presence in her life, and began to play softly. The children soon joined her, singing a song they had composed in the music therapy workshops. "It's amazing how music has this power to unite people," Michael commented, observing the scene from the door. He had just returned from a trip where he presented the Martin Tech model at an international congress on social responsibility. The day was special for another reason. It was the official launch of the Solidarity Connection app, a platform that connected donors, volunteers, and social projects. The idea was born from Lucas's personal experiences, who knew well the importance of doing good anonymously. "You know what moves me the most?" Mary commented during the app's presentation. "Seeing how a story of separation has transformed into thousands of stories of union." The company's auditorium, the same where months before the assembly that changed everything had taken place, was now filled with smiling faces. Representatives from NGOs, business people, artists, and people in vulnerable situations, all united by the same purpose. Lucas took the stage for his speech, but before that, he made a gesture to Helen. She immediately understood, picking up her guitar and positioning herself at his side. Mary joined them, her inseparable poetry notebook in her hands. "A year ago," Lucas began, "I was a different man. I lived surrounded by numbers, but empty of meaning. It took an accident, a period of darkness for me to really see." Helen began to gently strum the guitar strings, while Mary opened her notebook to the most recent page. Today, we're not just presenting an app or a social project. We're presenting a new way of seeing the business world, one where success is not measured only in profits, but in smiles, in transformed stories, in lives touched. Helen's soft music served as a backdrop for Mary to recite her new verses, written especially for the occasion. Verses that spoke of new beginnings, of unconditional love, of how sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. Mrs. Celeste, in her usual corner, smiled with her mysterious way. "See," she whispered to Diana, who was by her side. "Sometimes the universe needs to take some very big turns to put everything in the right place." On the screen behind them, images of the various projects alternated. Children learning programming, elderly people discovering the internet, street artists exhibiting in digital galleries, homeless people being trained for the job market. This is just the beginning," Lucas concluded, his voice laden with emotion, because when technology joins with love, there are no limits to what we can achieve. The Chicago autumn was painting the streets with golden tones when Helen decided to make a special surprise for Lucas. For months, she had secretly worked on a project with Mary, setting to music all the poems that Lucas's mother had written during the years of separation. "Are you sure it's ready?" Helen asked Michael, who was adjusting the final details in the auditorium of the Grace to Life Cultural Center. "All set," he replied, checking the sound system one last time. Mrs. Celeste is already bringing him. The space had been transformed. On the walls, projections showed old photos. Baby Lucas in Diana's arms, young Mary writing in her notebook, newspaper clippings about the New Horizons Foundation, and more recent images of Martin Tech's social projects. Mary rehearsed with a choir formed by people served by the company's social projects. Their voices blended harmoniously, singing the words she had written on lonely nights, now transformed into melodies of hope. "He's coming," Diana announced, hurriedly entering the auditorium. Mrs. Celeste managed to convince him to come with that story about a special blessing for the cultural center. Everyone took their places. Helen positioned herself in the center of the stage with her guitar, while Mary prepared with the choir backstage. The late afternoon light came through the stained glass windows, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Lucas entered the auditorium, guided by Mrs. Celeste, and stopped in surprise seeing the transformed environment. Before he could say anything, the first notes of Helen's guitar filled the air. "This is your story," Helen began, her voice soft, told through the words of a mother who never stopped loving, the hands that raised you with devotion, and the destiny that united us in such unexpected ways. The choir emerged from the sides of the stage, with Mary at the front. Each song told a different chapter: the birth, the separation, the years of searching, the reunion, the redemption. The projections on the walls accompanied the narrative, creating a multi-sensory experience. Lucas sat in the front row, between Diana and Mrs. Celeste, silent tears running down his face as he absorbed each note, each word, each image, his entire life being told through music and poetry. "When you were in a coma," Helen spoke between songs, "I sang to keep your soul connected to the world. Today, we sing to celebrate all the connections that were born from that moment." A special song began, the story of awakening, of the discovery of love, of the transformation of a man who learned to feel. The choir sang the chorus while Mary recited new verses, written especially for that night. Michael, from the back of the auditorium, observed with satisfaction the success of his sound system. At his side, a group of executives from other companies specially invited for the event watched the presentation in amazement. "This is how real change is made," one of them commented, "through art, emotion, human connection." The presentation reached its peak with a song about new beginnings, about how love can transform companies into families, strangers into friends, pain into poetry. Helen and Mary were singing together now, their voices intertwining as their lives had intertwined through Lucas. When the last note dissipated in the air, Lucas stood up. Without words, he walked to the stage and embraced the two women who had given new meaning to his existence. Diana joined the embrace and soon Mrs. Celeste as well. "Look," the lady commented with her mysterious smile, "how music has the power to heal even the oldest wounds." The sun was setting in Chicago, and through the stained glass windows of the cultural center, its rays created a spectacle of colors that seemed to bless that moment of pure human connection. News of the special concert at the Grace to Life Cultural Center quickly spread throughout the city. Journalists sought Lucas for interviews, wanting to know more about how a technology company had transformed into a catalyst for social change through art. It wasn't a marketing strategy, he patiently explained in his office, now decorated, with photographs of the concert. It was a journey of rediscovery of what truly matters. Helen had transformed the experience into a pilot music therapy project that was now being implemented in hospitals throughout the city. Her sessions combined technology and music, allowing recovering patients to find comfort and hope through art. "It's incredible how everything connects," she commented during a meeting with the medical team. "The music that helped me endure night shifts that brought Lucas back now helps other people find their way back to life." Mary had become a beloved figure at the cultural center. Her poetry workshops attracted people of all ages and social classes. The poetry notebook, that for so long was her only confidant, now inspired others to transform their pain into art. "Every story deserves to be told," she would tell her students. "Every tear can become verse. Every longing can become song." A special afternoon, the cultural center received an unexpected visit. Richard, after serving his sentence for embezzlement, came personally to ask for forgiveness. He found not condemnation, but an opportunity for redemption. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Lucas said, offering his cousin a place in the social reintegration project. "That's what I learned when I received my own second chance in life." Diana and Mary had become inseparable, collaborating on a new project that used artificial intelligence to connect separated families. Their personal experiences guided the development of a system that had already helped dozens of people to reunite. "Sometimes I think," Diana reflected during a coffee with Mary, "how blind we were to think that love had to be exclusive. There's room in the heart for all kinds of love." Mrs. Celeste continued with her blessings and mysterious insights, now not only at the hospital, but also at the cultural center. Her special corner, full of candles and aromatic herbs, had become a space for welcoming and reflection. "The universe," she used to say, "has its own music. Our task is to learn to dance with it." Michael expanded Martin Tech's social responsibility department, transforming it into a model studied by companies around the world. His motto was simple: security is not just about protecting material assets, but about caring for everyone's well-being. On a special night, Lucas surprised Helen with a dinner on the terrace of the cultural center. Among candles and flowers, he had an important question to ask. But before he could speak, she picked up her guitar. "I have a new song for you," she said, beginning to play, "one I wrote about our future." The soft notes floated in the air as she sang about love, new beginnings, and promises. Lucas listened. As he had listened during those months in the hospital, his heart overflowing with gratitude and love. "You taught me to listen with my heart," he said when the music ended. "Now I want to spend the rest of my life composing our own melody together." The ring he offered was simple, but carried a deep meaning. Inside was engraved a passage from the poem Mary had written on the day he was born. "For my son, who carries music in his soul." Spring arrived in Chicago, bringing new beginnings. The wedding of Helen and Lucas would be held in the garden of the Grace to Life Cultural Center, a space that perfectly symbolized the union between art and technology, between the old and the new, between different stories that intertwined into a single melody. Mary and Diana worked together on the preparations, transforming the location into a magical setting. Natural flowers mixed with small programmable LED lights, creating artificial constellations that dance to the rhythm of the breeze. "Every detail tells a story," Mary explained to the volunteers helping with the decoration. "The white roses represent new beginnings. The lights are like the stars that guided me on the nights I wrote to my son." Helen spent her free hours at the hospital finalizing a special project, a music therapy program that would be officially launched on the wedding day. The system, developed in partnership with Martin Tech's technology team, allowed recovering patients to create their own compositions, even with physical limitations. "Music brought me the love of my life," she explained to her medical colleagues. "Now I want to ensure other patients have the chance to find their own healing through it." Lucas, for his part, had transformed the presidency of Martin Tech into a model of collaborative management. His office now had glass walls, symbolizing the transparency that became the company's trademark. In a special corner, Helen's guitar was always present, reminding everyone that even the most important decisions needed to have soul. "You've transformed not just the company, but the entire market," commented a journalist during an interview. "How do you feel about that?" "It wasn't a planned transformation," Lucas replied, looking out the window at the cultural center that stood across the street. "It was a natural evolution when we learned to balance the logic of numbers with the poetry of life." On the eve of the wedding, an exciting surprise awaited the couple. Mary's workshop students, along with the cultural center choir, had prepared a special performance. Each participant contributed a verse or a melody, creating a unique composition that told the story of Lucas and Helen. "Just look," Mrs. Celeste commented, her eyes shining with her characteristic wisdom, "how love has the power to create new constellations of affection." Michael coordinated the event's security with his new humanized style. Instead of cameras and metal detectors, he relied on a team trained in welcoming and conflict mediation. "True security," he said, "begins with respect and ends with love." Richard, who had found his own path to redemption working with vulnerable youth, asked to participate in the ceremony in a special way. He wanted to play the piano during Helen's entrance, a song he had composed during his period of reflection. "Music teaches us that harmony doesn't mean the absence of different notes," he explained during rehearsal, "but rather the ability to make all notes work together." The night before the big day, Helen found Lucas on the terrace of the cultural center. He was sitting at the piano, trying to learn the melody she always sang during her hospital shifts. "It's still not perfect," he apologized when he saw her. "It doesn't need to be perfect," she replied, sitting beside him. "It just needs to be genuine, like our love." Together they began to play, he on the piano, she on the guitar. Their different songs gradually met in a unique harmony, just as their lives had intertwined in an unexpected and perfect way. From the garden below, Mary and Diana observed the scene, their hearts full of joy. Mary's poetry notebook was open to a new page, where she began to write verses about how love had the power to transform not just people, but an entire world around them. The wedding day dawned with a special light in Chicago. The garden of the Grace to Life Cultural Center was transformed. A path of natural flowers led to an altar where technology and nature merged harmoniously. Small holographic displays projected digital butterflies that seemed to dance among the real flowers. Helen was getting ready in a special room, accompanied by Mary. Her dress, a unique creation, incorporated small lights that pulsed gently like a beating heart. But the most precious accessory was a delicate clip made from pages of Mary's old poetry notebook. "Each word here," Mary explained, helping to adjust the clip, "was written with love. Now they accompany you in this new beginning." On the other side of the cultural center, Lucas adjusted his tie while Diana organized his boutonniere. "Son," she said softly, "today you are not just the president of Martin Tech or the son of your two mothers. Today you are simply a man in love, ready to write a new chapter." Mrs. Celeste circulated through the venue, sprinkling her aromatic herbs and whispering blessings. She had prepared a special ritual that blended tradition and innovation, electronic candles that changed color according to the vibrations of the environment. "Love," she explained to curious guests, "is like a universal frequency that harmonizes all other energies." The moment of the ceremony arrived. Richard positioned himself at the piano, his hands trembling slightly over the keys. When he began to play, the melody he created was a delicate version of the song Helen used to sing in the hospital, a symbol of his own transformation and redemption. Helen appeared at the beginning of the flower path, radiant. In her hands, besides the bouquet, she carried her inseparable guitar. Lucas, seeing her, felt his heart race exactly as it did on those nights in the hospital when her voice was his only contact with the world. The ceremony was unique in every detail. The Cultural Center Choir, formed by people served by the social projects, sang harmonies that echoed through the garden. The holographic projections created magical sceneries that transformed according to each moment. At the moment of the vows, Helen surprised everyone by picking up her guitar. "My vows are a song," she announced, "because it was through music that our love began." Her fingers gently strummed the strings while her voice filled the garden with a new melody, created especially for that moment. The lyrics spoke about predestined encounters, about how sometimes we need to lose our voice to find our true music. Lucas, moved, responded with words that came from the depths of his soul. "You taught me that life is not a spreadsheet to be filled, but a song to be composed. Every day by your side is a new note in our particular symphony." Mary and Diana, seated together in the front row, held each other's hands, their past differences completely dissolved in the love they shared for their son and for the new daughter. They were gaining. Michael, discreet as always, coordinated his team with a smile on his face. The security system he had created for the event was revolutionary. Cameras that captured smiles instead of threats, sensors that measured the joy in the environment. After the exchange of rings, a surprise awaited the guests. Mary's workshop. Students had prepared a special presentation, musicalized poems that told the story of Lucas and Helen, from the accident to that moment. "See," Mrs. Celeste commented, her eyes shining with emotion, "how the universe weaves its golden threads. Each moment of pain was necessary to reach this joy." The sun was beginning to set when the newlyweds danced their first waltz. It wasn't a traditional song, but a unique composition that blended Richard's piano, Helen's guitar, and the choir's voices, a perfect metaphor for how different stories could unite in a single and beautiful melody. A year had passed since the wedding. The Grace to Life Cultural Center had become a model of integration between technology and humanity, inspiring similar initiatives in other cities. On a special afternoon, Helen gathered everyone for an important announcement. The auditorium was packed. Mary, her poetry notebook always in hand, sat in the front row next to Diana. The two women had become inseparable, sharing not only their love for their son, but also a common mission, helping other families reconnect. "You won't believe it," Mrs. Celeste commented, her eyes shining with her characteristic mystery. "But I dreamed of this moment months ago." The stars were aligned for this news. Helen took the stage, her guitar over her shoulder as always. Lucas watched her from the front row, his heart racing as it did in those days in the hospital when her voice was his only contact with the outside world. "Today," Helen began, gently strumming the strings, "I want to share a new song, one that speaks about how life always finds ways to create new melodies." Her hands glided over the guitar, creating a soft and gentle melody. The lyrics spoke about small miracles, about how love had the power to create new life. When she finished singing, her eyes met Lucas's. "We're pregnant," she announced, her voice overflowing with emotion. The news was received with an explosion of joy. Mary and Diana embraced, tears of happiness running down their faces. Michael, always discreet, smiled in his corner, while Richard, who had become a different man, sat at the piano to play an improvised celebration song. "3 generations," Mary whispered, opening her notebook to a new page. "A new life to heal all the separations of the past." The Cultural Center gained a special energy in the months that followed. Helen continued her work at the hospital, now developing a special music therapy program for pregnant women. Her sessions combined cutting-edge technology with the sensitivity of live music. Lucas transformed a room at Martin Tech into a space dedicated to family projects. Technology, he used to say, should serve to bring people together, not separate them. Mary began a new series of poetry workshops, this time focused on family stories. Her notebook, once a repository of longing, now overflowed with hope and joy. Diana, for her part, organized events that united different generations through art and technology. On a special afternoon, as the sun was setting over Chicago, the entire family gathered in the garden of the cultural center. Helen, her belly now visible, played guitar while Mary recited her new poems. Lucas observed the scene, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "You know," Mrs. Celeste commented, sitting beside him, "sometimes the universe needs time to compose its perfect music. Each note of pain, each pause of longing, everything is part of the final melody." Richard, who had found his redemption through music, now gave piano lessons to underprivileged children. That afternoon, he brought his students for a special presentation, a composition that spoke about new beginnings and second chances. "It's incredible," Michael reflected, observing the scene, "how a story that began with so much sadness can generate so many fruits of joy." The baby, still in the womb, seemed to respond to the music. Helen said he moved more when he heard Mary's compositions or the melodies she used to sing in the hospital. It was as if, even before being born, he already understood the importance of music in his family history. The birth of Sophie transformed the Grace to Life Cultural Center into an even more special place. The girl's first cry sounded like the purest note those walls had ever witnessed. Helen, exhausted but radiant, held her daughter in her arms while softly humming the same melody that had brought Lucas back to life. "She has your eyes," Lucas whispered, marveling at the small life that now completed his family. "And Mary's smile." The two grandmothers couldn't contain their emotion. Mary had already prepared a new poetry notebook, this time bound in soft pink fabric, to record each precious moment of her granddaughter. Diana, in turn, had transformed a room at the Cultural Center into a special space for babies where technology and affection met in innovative ways. Mrs. Celeste, who seemed more radiant than ever, blessed little Sophie with her aromatic herbs and words of wisdom. "This child," she declared with her mysterious smile, "is living proof that love has the power to rewrite destinies." The months that followed brought a new dynamic to the Cultural Center. Sophie grew surrounded by music, poetry, and technology. Her crib, a special project from Martin Tech's innovation team, softly reproduced the songs Helen used to sing in the hospital, now a fundamental part of the family's history. "It's amazing," Helen commented during one of the music therapy sessions, with Sophie peaceful in her lap, "how life finds ways to create perfect harmonies from seemingly dissonant notes." The family integration program created by Lucas had expanded to other cities. The story of the Martin Sullivan family inspired people around the world, showing that it was possible to unite business success with social purpose, technology with humanity. On a special afternoon, when Sophie turned 1 year old, the entire family gathered in the garden of the Cultural Center for a unique celebration. Mary and Helen had prepared a special presentation, a song that told the complete story of how love had transformed their lives. Richard, seated at the piano, accompanied the melody, while the Cultural Center Choir, now internationally recognized, joined the presentation. Michael, always attentive, coordinated everything with a discreet smile, remembering how that story had begun. "See," Mrs. Celeste commented to the guests, "how a simple lullaby can change the destiny of so many people." Lucas, observing his family gathered, realized that his life had transformed into something much greater than he had ever imagined. Martin Tech was no longer just a technology company, but a catalyst for social transformations. The Cultural Center had become a model of how art and innovation could work together to create a better world. Sophie, in her mother's arms, smiled to the sound of the music. Her small fingers tried to imitate Helen's movements on the guitar, as if she already understood that she was destined to continue this story of love and music. "Life," Mary recited, her words echoing through the garden, "is like a great symphony. Each person we meet adds their own note. Each moment of pain or joy contributes to the final melody." And so, under the Chicago sky, a new generation began its own